my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is brought to you by S&P Therapeutics, makers of the G8 test. Based on over $16 million in NIH grants and more than 30 years of nutrition and genetic research, S&P Therapeutics is leading the charge in the field of prenatal precision nutrition genetic testing. S&P Therapeutics is committed to providing accurate and usable information to help mothers provide the best possible nutrition to their babies through the G8 test, a prenatal precision nutrition genetic test that offers personalized dietary adjustments and supplement recommendations based on your DNA. You can rest easy knowing that your prenatal nutrition has been optimized by tailoring it to your genetic code. Find peace of mind about your prenatal nutrition with the G8 test by S&P Therapeutics and learn more at genate.com and use the coupon code BIRTHHOUR15 for 15% off your order. At the end of this episode, I talk with Kara from S&P Therapeutics all about the G8 test and its benefits, so stay tuned for that conversation. Okay, before we get to today's birth story, I just wanted to chat a little bit about a couple other aspects of the Birth Hour community. If you're new to the podcast, you may not know that we also have an online childbirth course. It's called Know Your Options. It's 12 modules of all evidence-based information where I've partnered with a childbirth educator, a birth and postpartum doula, and lactation counselor to cover everything from final weeks of pregnancy through preparing for your birth, any type of birth. We go over everything, starting with planned cesareans and going through unmedicated versus medicated inductions, really any kind of thing that might come up for you so that you can be prepared no matter how your birth goes. And then, of course, we talk about postpartum and caring for your baby. And then there's a bonus course that comes with that is called Beyond the First Latch, where we talk about feeding baby, pumping, storing milk, going back to paid work, all of those things. That's an additional 6 modules that is free with the main course, or you can buy it separately. You can find out more about the course, including detailed outlines of everything included at thebirthhour.com/course. And along with that, you also get access to a private Facebook group just for our childbirth course students and bi-weekly Zoom calls where we get together and get your questions answered or just connect and find community. To join the course, head to thebirthhour.com/course and you can use the coupon code 100OFF for $100 off enrollment. Another way to support the Birth Hour and connect with our community is by becoming a Patreon member. If you're not familiar with Patreon, it's a platform where you can support creators that you love by offering a monthly monetary support. Ours starts at $5 a month and you get access to all of our archived episodes, over 600 episodes, not in the main podcast feed, as well as access to the best Facebook group ever where you'll find so much great support. And then another perk that I don't talk about often is that every month we draw 2 names to share their stories on the podcast. Find out more about that and join at patreon.com/birthhour. It's linked in this app where you're listening to the podcast, as well as on thebirthhour.com. Today's birth story guest is Lauren, and she has 2 positive hospital birth stories to share with us, as well as some things that came up for her postpartum. She does also briefly mention a miscarriage between those 2 births, so I just want you to be aware of that going into listening to this episode. All right, let's hear from Lauren. Hi, Lauren. Welcome to the Birth Hour. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Bryn. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, I'm excited. You've got 2 stories to share. Before we get to that, will you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Lauren. I'm 35 years old. I live with my husband and our 2 kids in Beckett, Massachusetts. My daughter, Maya, just turned 3, and my son, Reese, is 11 months old. We have a dog and 2 cats. And prior to living in Beckett, my husband and I both lived in Boston for about a decade, and we decided to move to the Berkshires the day we came home from the hospital with our firstborn. So I have plenty of tips for what not to do in the immediate postpartum that I would love to share.
Yeah, when you told me that before we started recording, I think I snort laughed. I was like, what?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Oh my gosh.
Not my best idea.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to hearing that full story, but why don't you take us back to your pregnancy and how that went?
Yeah, so we got pregnant pretty quickly after we decided to go for it in 2020. We were married in October 2019. We had a nice honeymoon. We got a puppy. And then soon thereafter, the world shut down for the pandemic. My husband and I were both working remotely from our apartment in East Boston. At that time, we were both already on the more cautious side of the spectrum when it came to COVID. There had been a couple of deaths in my family directly related to COVID. So our tolerance for risk during my pregnancy with our daughter was like super low. And there was so much unknown at that point with the impact to pregnancy and babies. So we just had a really like low key, quiet pregnancy. We stayed home a lot. We watched a lot of movies, which honestly, in hindsight, was kind of a blessing in disguise that we just got to focus on, ourselves and it's like preparation for a new stage of life. So it was pretty exciting and pretty quiet. I am a project manager at a law firm. My husband is a personal trainer, both jobs that are traditionally not super easy to do remotely. But with the pandemic, that changed everything pretty dramatically. The way we work just changed. So, prior to the pandemic, prior to having kids, we both really thrived in the city. We love Boston, but when the pandemic hit and we were able to suddenly like explore other options, and we started taking stock of our life and the values we want to establish with a growing family, we started talking about what it could look like to move out of the city. I grew up in Maine and my husband grew up in the suburbs of Boston. And we just kind of realized that, the city was not where we wanted to start our family. So we bought a house out in the Berkshires where, life is a little slower. There's really easy access to nature, which is super important to us. There's just more room to breathe and be creative and more space to focus on family. So we found a house and we thought we were being really clever by setting the closing date to be like 6 weeks before my due date in May 2021. So we very naively thought we would have plenty of time to move our lives out to the new space before baby arrived. And I had heard from many friends and family members, that your first baby doesn't often come early. So we were really banking on the full 40 weeks. The plan was that we would have everything ready to go at the new house, that, when we were discharged from the hospital, we would be coming home to a new, clean, organized house with a healthy baby and, start our new life. But little did I know that wasn't exactly how it was to be for us. We made it work, but, it was a wild ride and it honestly still kind of is. So pregnancy was pretty unremarkable in that I had no complications. I had, morning sickness for the first half of the pregnancy, but I was really active and healthy. I was going to spin classes with a mask on until like 7 months pregnant, still lifting weights. We decided to find out our baby's sex on Christmas morning, just the two of us, is kind of like a big present to us, which is really special. My husband was amazing throughout, and he would read stories to my belly, which was just like unbelievably sweet. We took the Know Your Options course together. We listened to the birth hour a ton. It was just a really special time for us, even though we didn't get to do like the traditional social stuff related to pregnancy. For example, I basically had coworkers who never even knew I was pregnant because they just saw me, from torso up on camera. So I guess that was a little bizarre, but, the pregnancy was relatively textbook. Baby was active and I felt connected and excited. By the end I was tired and ready, but it was a relatively straightforward pregnancy. For care, I was being cared for by a midwifery practice at a large hospital in Boston. I connected with one of the midwives there. I really liked their approach to birth. I think what they said to me was that, birth is a natural process to be supported rather than a medical issue to be treated. And that just really resonated with me. I really liked the low intervention approach. Because of the pandemic, appointments were pretty sparse. I think I only saw the team in person like 5 times during the entire pregnancy. So that was definitely a lot less than normal. But, I think they just didn't want pregnant people to be like going into the hospital unless they needed to be there. So pretty straightforward, pretty, good pregnancy.
Okay, and I know you did the Know Your Options course and listened to lots of birth stories. Anything else to prepare for birth?
So we took the Know Your Options course. We did a lot of listening to the birth hour, which I think was really helpful for us because I especially am like very squeamish when it comes to, the gory details of birth. So hearing other people talk about their experiences and like what could happen was just so critical for us. We didn't have like an ironed out game plan, like I want XYZ, but we knew that we were kind of prepared to be able to take it in stride and make informed decisions, which I think is like the best you can do with birth. So yeah, we felt prepared in that respect. I wasn't necessarily planning on, the particular type of pain management. I'm somebody who doesn't do great with anesthesia. So I was definitely kind of looking to avoid certain interventions. I like to move around, so I didn't really know what I wanted, but I just wanted to know what the options were. So the course was perfect, and the birth hour was just like a good exposure that we just didn't have.
All right. Well, anything else from pregnancy you want to share, or go ahead and get into the birth story?
I think we can get into the birth story. Labor started, it was a Tuesday night, April 2021. I was 37 weeks pregnant. We had just spent the prior weekend at our new house painting and getting some basic furniture out there. We just closed on our house. My parents had come down from Maine to help us get some stuff set up. We still had our apartment in the city for a few more months, so we could do a slow move if we wanted to, which in hindsight was a terrible idea. But my in-laws had helped us the weekend before that. And, it's a 2-hour drive out of the city to the new house. And I'm super pregnant. I had been doing a ton of cleaning. I was like up on kitchen countertops, scrubbing, and just like ultimate nesting mode in our big empty house. So I had pushed it a little harder than I should have that weekend. And my mom was basically like telling me, like, please sit down and put your feet up. And, my mind's racing about this huge list of things we have to do. But, we got some basic stuff done. We had our bed set up. We had, I think we had lawn furniture in our living room at that point because we were still waiting for furniture to be delivered. And we had a bassinet set up. But, I think we had baby clothes in bins and like tons of laundry that needed to be done. We had primer on some of the walls. We had like a ladder hanging up in our like master bedroom. Like it was just we were not ready. We did what we needed to do to get the space clean and kind of the foundational stuff you do when you move. But we were both exhausted. And I think throughout the pregnancy, my biggest fear was probably worry about getting separated during labor because one of us had COVID. And at that time, different hospitals had different guidelines, and I was just really worried about being split up. I would say that my husband's presence and participation in the birth was probably like the only non-negotiable for me in my birth plan. So I was really adamant that we would just take every precaution we could. I insisted that my husband get his vaccine like on the schedule to the dot, like militantly. Poor guy, like really suffered from me at that point. But, we got back to the city from this long weekend of cleaning, and he went and got his COVID vaccine that day. And it made him feel like absolute trash. Like he was sick. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, maybe this wasn't a good idea. Like if I have to take care of him while I'm like going into labor, like this is not going to be good. But he muscled through. But that night, back in the city, we're just like both exhausted. And our huge dog, who was like 140 pounds at that time, he kept trying to get into bed with us, which, our bed could barely fit the two of us with my huge belly in our tiny apartment. And the dog, Rooster, was like pretty aware of my pregnancy the whole time. He used to put his big head on my belly and he would follow me around everywhere. Super cute. But him trying to get into the bed might have been a clue in hindsight, but I was like pretty oblivious. So that night, my husband kissed my belly, his normal routine. And he said, see you soon, which struck me because normally he would say like, I love you, sweet dreams or whatever. But he said, see you soon. And then, said goodnight to me. And I had been dealing with the usual aches and pains of third trimester, with some of the added stress, of course, of like closing on our first home and moving and, preparing for a baby during a pandemic. But that night I actually slept really well, despite a lot of restless nights in the recent past. But what's interesting is that the next morning around 5:30, I woke up from this incredibly vivid dream. And in the dream, I could see my baby's feet sticking out of my stomach. And I just remember looking down at my belly being like, whoa, that's really cool. And I woke up from the dream really abruptly and I got out of bed. And the second I stood up and was out of bed, I heard and felt this like enormous pop. My water broke in a really dramatic fashion. And I was grateful that it was so obvious because I'm kind of a chronic overthinker. And if it had not been clear, I probably would have been in denial about my water breaking. But we knew, I knew what was going on. So, and we had just had my weekly appointment a few days prior. Everything was looking fine. There was no progress. I wasn't dilated. So I was kind of thinking we had a few more weeks and, we were banking on it with the move. I also had a really big presentation at work that day where I would be doing a lot of talking in front of a large audience. And I was kind of in denial because I was like preparing for that and all these other things. But I woke my husband up. I told him what happened and he was like snapped to, like he was excited. He wasn't super panicked. We called the midwives and they said, this is great. Get your bags packed, eat a good breakfast if you're hungry and come on in. Like they imparted that, there's no need to rush, but like come in don't dilly-dally, come in when you can. You're going to have a baby. So, despite the very obvious breaking of water, I was still kind of in disbelief because I didn't have any pain. I didn't have any noticeable contractions. I was 37 weeks and 5 days and I felt really good. I was tired, but good. So we kind of scrambled to pack up, the remainder of our hospital bags. We ate breakfast. And as we were coordinating with my in-laws on the phone to come and get the dog, I suddenly started having like incredible pain. It nearly knocked me off my feet and I knew we had to go. So at that point, it was probably around 7:15 and we were heading into rush hour traffic, which was like my nightmare. So my husband helped me get into the car. Our poor dog Rooster was like frantic about us leaving him. He knew something was up with me and it was like kind of hard to leave him in distress like that, but we had to get out of the house. As I mentioned before, my plan for the pregnancy was like using some breathing techniques and, potentially taking advantage of nitrous oxide. And, I wanted to make sure that I could move around in pregnancy. I wanted to try to avoid the epidural, but, it was a very loose plan, which is honestly kind of unusual for me because I literally plan things for a living and I'm very type A, usually very organized, but, this part of my life was very different. So of course we hit major traffic and I did a lot of laboring in the car in rush hour traffic in a tunnel under the Boston Harbor, which again is like nightmare fuel for me.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
It was bad. And I was holding on to that little handle above the door and like squeezing through contractions. I can't even imagine what that must have looked like from the cars next to us in traffic, but it was intense for me. And my husband was playing my birthing playlist of like calming music and meditations, and they were just like not doing anything for me. I think my brain was still kind of in denial despite the pain, despite any of the reality. It just couldn't reconcile what was happening. Because again, we had this whole plan. This was not part of the plan. And I just, I could not wrap my mind around it to kind of get into that zone. We weren't timing contractions because my husband was driving and I just did not have the wherewithal to do that. But they were coming really quickly and I don't think I was getting much of a break between them. So the drive from our apartment without traffic to the hospital usually takes like 5 to 6 minutes. But with traffic, it ended up taking around 45 minutes. When we did finally get to the hospital, which is like a huge hospital in the city, it was really busy. And at that time, everyone had to follow COVID procedures and, get screened to enter the building. I think there were like temperature checks. And I think you even had to sign like an attestation that you didn't have COVID symptoms. But fortunately, a security guy saw my husband kind of like half carrying me in and he brought us to the front of the line. We got to triage. And when we got to triage, we're like waiting to be like literally let in the doors. My husband realized he left his phone in the car. So he had to run back to the garage to get his phone. And again, like my number one fear was us getting separated and him not being allowed to come into labor with me. So at that point, things started to kind of turn for me emotionally and mentally. Like I started to panic. I wasn't calm. I was just like really, really worried about us being separated. So that was scary. But when I was seen at triage, I got the sense that they were kind of thinking like, oh, first time mom, she's probably, just not really sure what she's dealing with. But when they examined me, I was between 7 and 8 centimeters dilated and like fully effaced. So my pain was really intense. For me, what was unfortunate was that I was also vomiting as a result of the pain, something I was not expecting. And it was really awful, especially because we had to wear masks and it was super unpleasant. So that, combined with this fear of being separated, having just sat in rush hour traffic, which is normally stressful for me, but laboring in a tunnel I was really mentally unprepared. I just did not feel like equipped to deal with the situation. And of course, again, still had all these like big unknowns like looming in my mind. I had a presentation that day. We were moving soon. Baby was not supposed to be here. It was early. So I think it really just messed with my ability to cope. My very loose birth plan was already like way off track. So I had like lavender oil and like a birth comb in my bag that never got used. I don't think we turned on the birth playlist like at all once we were in the hospital. But best laid plans. So, we made it work. So at triage, after they saw how far along I was admitted very quickly and reunited with my husband very shortly thereafter. So that was really good. On a positive note, we learned that my midwife, on a rotation of like 20 plus midwives, just so happened to be on call that day, which was amazing because I felt a really strong connection with her. I felt safe with her. I was excited. And this was like one part of the plan that was going according to plan. So I was like very relieved to hear that. On a not so positive note, I had also planned to use, nitrous oxide, or at least have it as an option for my pain management. And I learned that in order to use nitrous oxide at that point, you had to pass a COVID test first. But, again, this was fairly early in the pandemic, and COVID tests at that time at a big hospital were taking like 4 hours to come back. So they basically told me, like, you're probably going to have this baby before we can get you the pain management that you want. And I think just hearing that, and like, I was like, my vomiting was so intense and just mentally feeling like in a whirlwind, I asked for the epidural. The epidural was tough because I was heaving so much and my contractions were so close together, but they got it. And I remember signing the consent forms for the epidural. And like, usually I am the one who does read the fine print and like ask questions about every little thing. But I think in my current state, I would have signed pretty much anything in front of me. But once the epidural was placed, I felt relief and like super fast. Like it did exactly what I needed it to do. It was such a huge relief. My labor did slow way down, which I know is a possibility. It did happen for me. But I was able to rest, and I actually even kind of dozed off between contractions for a little bit, which was kind of wild. I did not expect that to even be possible. Once everything slowed down, Tom and I just hung out and like we kind of chatted about names. We still hadn't decided. We called my team at work to let them know I would be presenting our project that day. We were kind of like noticing how much the nurse who was helping us, she reminded me of like one of my dearest, oldest friends, which felt like a really great omen. Like it was just, I felt so cared for. And I just felt like I had a really good team. So it was a great day once I was able to get like the vomiting under control and my mind around what was happening. So we just kind of hung out. It was like pretty relaxing, honestly, for a little bit. I never really felt the urge to push, which again was a surprise to me because everybody talks about this like primal, like, is this happening and you can't do anything about it. But I did not feel that way at all. I just was like, okay, I don't feel the urge. But the midwife asked me, like, it's like 3:30, like, do you want to give it a shot? And I was like, yeah, why not? So I tried and, I pushed for like 20, 25 minutes and baby came out screaming, purple, beautiful, crying. It was indescribably wonderful. I got to have skin to skin immediately, delayed cord clamping. And it was just so cool to see that first latch. Definitely a moment that I will remember until I die. It was just blissful. So really, I was very fortunate that some parts of the plan like did work out really well.
Yeah.
But yeah, the immediate kind of afterglow was wonderful. Baby was nursing pretty well. Latch wasn't super comfortable, but it was fine. And honestly, nobody really said that the latch should feel comfortable. So I just assumed that, a little discomfort was normal. She was healthy. My husband and I learned in the hospital how to change a diaper for the first time, in our 30s. It was a learning experience for us. But once the adrenaline wore off, I was just like ragged and tired. And I was unbelievably thirsty and I had a really terrible headache. And the staff gave me Tylenol. And when that didn't really help, they kept suggesting some other medication to address the headaches. And again, as somebody who likes to do the research and read the fine print before I do anything, I really didn't feel good about the medication they were suggesting while nursing without doing more research on it. So I just declined. But I feel like once I declined that suggested approach, I didn't feel like I was being taken seriously. Like the staff just kept telling me like, you're probably dehydrated. You just gave birth. It was a huge ordeal. Drink more water, have some caffeine, you'll be fine. So that was really hard because I just felt like, I kept trying to advocate and it just wasn't really getting anywhere. And I think, between my husband and I, again, we had all these things swirling around us and it was still really a whirlwind situation. So I don't think either one of us in the hospital had like an understanding of what this could be. So we left. When we were discharged from the hospital, we didn't even have the car seat set up. We had it in the back of our trunk. So we had to set that up before we could get out of there. And we had this big plan to move. But we had most of our stuff still in our apartment. Like all of the baby stuff was in the Berkshires, except for like a change of clothes and maybe a few diapers. So we had to go back to our apartment. When we got there, we ordered a pizza. I nursed. I cried. We stuffed some things in a suitcase and just decided, like, let's rip the Band-Aid off and go. Like, all of the baby stuff is there. Let's just go and we'll figure out the rest, which I don't know if that was smart. I really can't say, but I definitely wouldn't do it again.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's 2 hours from our place in the Berkshires to the city. And it's a long drive. I'd had stitches and was like pretty uncomfortable in the car. My husband was doing the like new dad driving and driving like way below the speed limit. So we ended up arriving at our new house at 10 p.m. in the dark. It was May 1st and it was snowing in the Berkshires, which we were not prepared for. I was wearing like a sundress and our poor daughter was like wearing like a cute little outfit to come home from the hospital, but like not equipped for snow. It was just such a terrible idea. Honestly, like we barely had sheets on our bed. Our fridge was empty. That night I just remember thinking like, what have we done? This is so irresponsible. And the next morning when we had survived the night, the feeling of relief seeing that sunrise that morning was like, again, a feeling I will never forget. My in-laws came from the Boston area to bring our dog. They brought us some groceries. And I honestly remember my mother and father-in-law, they brought us like towels and hampers for dirty clothes, like the most mundane thing ever. And when I saw it, it almost put me into tears. I was so overjoyed because it was such a train wreck on planning and like just the basic things that you don't necessarily think of when there's just two of you and you can kind of like deal with a little discomfort. But when you have a tiny baby and you've just had this huge ordeal in your life, like they become really, really helpful. So they bailed us out big time. And they kind of got us set up with like the basic stuff we needed in our house to function. And that was really nice. The immediate postpartum period was pretty rough. The headaches that I was having in the hospital were getting worse. Maya's latch was bitey and getting worse and just like really painful. I remember at one point I was using my breathing techniques that I had planned to use to manage pain in labor, to manage the pain of nursing. Maya had jaundice, and we were having to go to the pediatrician, which is 30 minutes away on country roads, like every day for heel pricks. And eventually her bilirubin levels got high enough that they had said like, okay, we're on the cusp of having to readmit you guys, but we can send you home with this Billy blanket to try to help reduce the bilirubin levels. So she had to spend like, I can't even remember, it felt like an eternity. It probably was not, but she had to spend certain increments of time like wrapped in this blanket, and it has these like blue lights that I guess help reduce bilirubin. So we called her a little glowworm, and it was scary for me, but I think we were both just so relieved that we had the option to keep her home and that we weren't having to go back to the hospital. At one point, the pediatrician's office had recommended we try to give her formula because she could have breast milk jaundice, which I guess is different than your typical jaundice, and that they think there's something with the milk that is like incompatible with baby's liver processing. I really didn't feel like this was it. And I was so determined to nurse her. Breastfeeding was something that not only did I really want to do, but it seemed like the ultimate calming tool for my daughter. Like she seemed happiest when she was latched, when she was snuggled in with me, and she was gaining great weight. She was having good diapers. So we declined. We just kept nursing, and we just kind of took the wait and see approach. Her bilirubin levels did get better, though it did take a little time, which I guess is common with breast milk jaundice. We did get some lactation support from a local group of lactation experts called the Berkshire Nursing Families. They were wonderful. And honestly, for anybody local, I can't recommend them enough. Like, they were just so wonderful. They helped us identify and get us referred out to somebody who could actually like assess her. But she did have a tongue tie, which was causing the painful latch. I also had a really strong letdown and ended up with like a pretty intense oversupply. But because we were so just overwhelmed with all this change at once, and she seemed to not be suffering, like she was fine, you know, she's a happy baby. We just chose to wait and see. You know, we never got it revised. Nursing eventually got easier, though I did, you know, for the first year, like suffered from recurrent clogged ducts. I had mastitis multiple times, which was like really tough physically and mentally. It was definitely a journey, but I was committed. And again, I nursed my daughter until she was 22 months. So like she really took to it. And it was kind of critical, I think, for our bonding. At 6 months postpartum, the headaches were still happening. And I started getting these visual disturbances accompanying them. So I had like flashing lights in my periphery. So I had to get vetted for like more serious neurological issues. I had to have my brain scanned. Ultimately, it was concluded that I most likely had a post-dural puncture headache, which I guess is when the epidural site doesn't heal properly or they made too big of a hole when placing the epidural. So you're essentially leaking spinal fluid and it causes tremendous pressure issues for your brain. So it was really, you know, it was kind of, I guess, in a way nice to get that validation. Like, okay, this is not imagined. You really are having these issues. For once, I was starting to feel like I was being taken seriously. But it was also frustrating because if it had been caught early enough, or if I had known the right questions to ask, they would have just done a blood patch in the hospital. But, you know, again, my attempts to be seen by the team that supported me during my pregnancy and labor, it just felt like it was contingent upon me taking some of their suggestions first. And I didn't have local support yet. Like, we hadn't gotten set up with a doctor out here. You know, my postpartum check, the like 6-week check, was done over the phone and not even on video. And it was like 4 minutes long. And like, when I told them about the headaches, they basically were like, oh, you know, it's probably hormonal migraines. These happen a lot. You just have some caffeine and drink more water. So it was disappointing because, you know, the team that I was working with that supported me so well during my pregnancy and my labor, I just felt like once the baby arrived, they kind of stopped caring. And that might have just been the nature of like pandemic and priorities and all of that. But that was really hard for me.
Yeah.
The only time the headaches would go away completely was if I would lay like flat on my back and close my eyes, which, as you can imagine, you know, as a nursing first time working mom in a new home with no village, it just felt kind of impossible to get that relief.
Yeah, not a ton of just laying flat on your back time available with a new baby.
Yeah. Fortunately, by like 9 months postpartum, the headache started to go away. But it was a long journey to get there. You know, and meanwhile, my husband just kind of like kept things together for the three of us. Like, he took a full paternity leave before starting his own business out here. And he took such good care of us and allowed me to be with my baby as much as I needed. I feel infinitely lucky to have had that level of support and love at home. But I didn't necessarily receive it from like the medical professionals we were engaging with. So definitely a rough postpartum, lots of lessons learned.
Yeah, I just recorded with someone else recently who had spinal headaches and had to really fight to get that blood patch done and to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Which apparently like gave her instant relief. They sent her home from the hospital a couple times when she tried to do that, which is just crazy to me.
It's amazing how hard that is. And I have a few of my close friends are nurses, and they just kept saying like, you need to ask for this. And I would bring it up and it was like, you know, are you Googling this? Like, I just didn't get the sense that anybody was taking me seriously. And that it's so hard to advocate for yourself normally, especially if you're somebody who's like conflict averse. The thick of postpartum, you know, it's just, there's so much to learn from that situation. So I feel like, I don't know, it was tough, but we got through it.
Oh yeah, I got through it, but headache for 9 months should not be a thing that you have to get through. So hopefully someone listening to this will know to fight for that treatment sooner. So thanks for sharing that part of your story. All right, well, we have another story to get to, so let's go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, so we knew we wanted to have more than one kid. And, you know, right around my daughter's first birthday, after the crazy year that we had before, we got pregnant again. Unfortunately, we ended up losing that pregnancy pretty late. It was right around the time we were going to tell the world about it. It was 12 and a half weeks, which was really tough. I was pretty depressed about it. we had gotten COVID at a family wedding that summer, and we were not able to get our first ultrasound until like 10, 11 weeks. That ultrasound revealed that there were some pretty major issues, and there was like very low chances of survival for the fetus. So they had recommended we do some genetic testing to see what was going on with that. And, again, see if there's anything that might inform future, pregnancies. What was presenting was definitely, it was not a good outlook. So we went with the genetic testing. We did lose a pregnancy. Unfortunately, the results of the genetic testing came back, and there was no indication for the loss, which I don't know if that was good or bad, because on one hand, we did not have any like major concerns about future pregnancies, but there was no explanation. And we were both so excited about this, and I felt connected very quickly with that pregnancy. So it was a really dark time for us. We did want to have kids close in age. We were nervous about our experience. We were nervous about, what if we have trouble conceiving? We didn't wait that long to try again. A few months later, we tried again. We got pregnant very quickly. We were a little skeptical about my son's due date because, my body hadn't like fully normalized after pregnancy, nursing, and a loss. I was still nursing my daughter, so I just didn't really have much to track in terms of timeline. But when we found out we were pregnant, I will say, and this is kind of sad to say, but it was more fearful than joyful. And I think that's kind of the theme of the pregnancy, to be honest. It was really emotionally very hard because we hadn't finished grieving the loss of this prior pregnancy. We felt like we were in a constant state of stress. We were still adjusting to life in our new spot. We were raising a toddler, we were navigating childcare, and my husband was building his business, and I was trying to distract myself with work. And, I also didn't necessarily want to wean my daughter. We were still nursing, and that was important to me to keep going. But, there were a lot of emotions to start off. And then it was kind of coupled with some actual complications. So I did have bleeding during my pregnancy with my son, which was honestly, I would say it was traumatic because we were just so worried we were going to lose another one. And I desperately wanted to have another baby, and I wanted to be excited about the pregnancy, but I almost wouldn't allow myself to be excited because we were so afraid of losing it. So the bleeding this pregnancy was heavy at times. And we, got checked, and it turns out that I had a subchorionic hematoma that was causing it. They were not really that worried about it though. So that was a huge relief. But again, you experience bleeding during pregnancy, it's really hard to kind of let that go and tell yourself you're going to be fine and baby's going to be fine.
Right.
So as a result, I was kind of a frequent flyer on the hospital's emergency midwife line. I think I had them on speed dial. But the care that I received at this hospital, in Springfield was really good and really compassionate. Even though at times I did feel like I had to kind of censor myself because I didn't want to be the boy who cried wolf, but I was all over every little thing with this pregnancy. One really exciting part of the pregnancy, a really good omen that we saw, was that at the 20-week anatomy scan, the ultrasound tech got a picture of my son giving us a thumbs up, which I think if we had listened to him in hindsight, he was probably telling us, I'm good, you're good, everything's going to be fine. It was
so cute.
A cherished photo for sure.
Yeah.
But we did not listen to it. We continued to worry. There was nothing specific to be worried about. It was still just this general, ominous feeling. Around 30 weeks, we did have a scare, and that baby boy was very active throughout the pregnancy. And then suddenly, there was a day where he just didn't move. So I went to the urgent care unit for this maternity ward, and they did a stress test, and baby was fine. They thought I was probably just dehydrated and probably stressed out, which is definitely accurate. They had me drink a lot of water, and his mint kind of resumed to normal. So I was, it was fine. But that day was the day that, I came home, and it was the first time that I said, this is an active choice to be joyful, and I'm going to be joyful about this because this is a gift, and it's not for granted. So I, at that moment, just decided I'm going to be happy about this pregnancy, and we're going to have a healthy baby. So once we kind of got over that, my fears around the pregnancy in general were just, I was worried that we would have precipitous labor, and that I would give birth in the car because we lived 40 minutes away on country roads. And everyone says your second baby comes faster, and my first came very quick. I was also afraid that my daughter would see me in pain. We're really connected. She's really empathetic. And I knew that if she saw me in like a dramatic labor like last time, that she would be pretty distressed. So I was really worried about her seeing us in labor. And then I was not sure what I wanted to do about pain management. The epidural for me was a gift because it allowed me to like rest and refocus and kind of reconcile with the mental reality of having a baby. But it was also the source of like 9 months of pain for me. So I had no idea what I wanted to do. My birth plan this time was just kind of the roll with the punches. Again, make informed decisions in the moment. I had asked my husband to be the buffer. Like if anyone was pressuring us to make decisions, that he would be the one to get us space to talk it through and ask questions. So that was like his goal, and he took it very seriously. And I was very grateful for that support. Fast forward to 36 weeks. I had my 36-week appointment. The midwife had said like, okay, you're somewhat dilated, somewhat effaced. Wouldn't be surprised if baby came in the next week or so, but like it could come whenever. So don't put too much stock into that timeline. But, given my history of like fast and furious labors and my fear of car birth, I was like ready to run to the hospital the second we started having contractions. And the midwife even said like, don't wait for pain. Just given your experience last time, just wait for anything rhythmic. Like you call us, you feel any sort of movement, you need to give us a call. So going into labor, it was another, work day. I was working up until I was in labor. Kind of hilariously, I had another big project that was coming to a head that day. I was helping my boss with something I really wanted to wrap up. And I started noticing some cramping and in a somewhat rhythmic fashion. I was overthinking it, but nothing was really regular. It felt a little different. So I called and they said, it's up to you. You might feel like you just want to be checked and we can do that. But we defer to you. So I finished what I was working on up. I felt really satisfied with like finishing it up and leaving it in a good place before going out on maternity leave. We called my sister-in-law to pick up our daughter from daycare and asked her if she could just hang out with her for dinner and maybe stay overnight. And, she was very happy to help us out with that. So we headed to the hospital. When we arrived at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was honestly a little frustrated because we had to check in at the front desk and they make you kind of sit through and like answer all these administrative questions, like, do you have insurance, and like demographic questions. And it's like, guys, like I've been here so many times, like we know this information and I think I'm having a baby. So, the person that was working with me was lovely and extremely patient. And I probably wasn't being super nice, but I was just worried that I was going to have a baby. So it took about an hour and a half to get actually seen by anybody. Once I was in triage, they checked me and they said, you're between 4 and 5 centimeters. But because I wasn't in like a lot of pain, I wasn't having these like earth-shattering contractions. They kind of kept me in triage for a bit just to kind of see what was going on. And I was like bouncing on like a big yoga ball. And, my husband and I were just like laughing and we were excited. And I feel like that's where we started to feel this big sense of relief. Like, okay, like we made it this far. For me, I was also incredibly relieved that I was not vomiting at that point. I had a chance to kind of get my mind around the fact that I was in labor. So that again was a huge gift. And then the biggest thing was just, we could not have planned the timing better with respect to my daughter. Like she had a fun day at school. She was being picked up by her beloved aunt. She wasn't going to see me in like agonizing pain. That was just an enormous relief. And we had never, we'd never even left her overnight, like not once in her life. So this was a big deal for her to have somebody else watching her. And we were just really concerned about the impact of this, just the event of birth would have on her, let alone, bringing home another baby. So we were just very, very relieved. I was admitted to labor and delivery at like 8:30. I was around 6 centimeters and pain was heating up at that point. I did decline the epidural initially, but after an hour or so of getting, closer and closer to that pain point of last time and starting to feel like really nauseated, I was like, I'm not vomiting again. Let's just like, give me the epidural, give me Zofran, like whatever you can do to prevent that, please do it. They placed the epidural. It was rough. Again, it took them twice to get it placed, but I was relieved when they got the epidural placed. It did work at first, but then it stopped working and I kept pushing the button. Like I'm feeling everything right now. And the nurse had said to me like, oh, it's not uncommon for people to still feel pain, a little pressure or a lot of pressure, a little pain. But I was feeling a lot of pain. Like I really was feeling everything. And because I had the epidural, I wasn't really allowed to get up and walk around due to the fall risk. And I also had all these cords and IVs coming out of me. So that was a little frustrating because it was like, the pitfalls of an epidural without the perks of one. But so I labored there for a bit. Baby's heart was decelerating kind of intermittently, and they kept moving me around because he seemed happier when I was not on my back. So that was actually a relief because I didn't want to be on my back. So I was just constantly being moved, and like I had a lot of people in my space, which is, I'm a pretty private person. I didn't love that there were a lot of people in the room. So that was hard for me. And I also think I could have gotten up and walked around with little issue, but I wasn't really allowed to move on my own. So that was tough. But around 1 a.m., my water still hadn't broken, which was very different than last time. I think they were starting to worry about things kind of stalling out. The pressure that I felt from my water was just making like the pain even worse. So they had suggested breaking the waters to kind of get things moving. And I was so relieved once this happened. Like that pain relief there was just like amazing, which is kind of bizarre if you say that out loud, but it definitely was a huge relief. Fast forward like an hour or two, I got checked. I was fully dilated. Baby wasn't necessarily in the right place to come out, and I was not feeling really ready to push. But there was starting to be a little bit of a sense of urgency in the room as, they kept trying to find the right spot where baby's heart was at a happy rate, and the monitors kept coming off me as everybody was moving me around. I had two people helping me kind of get into the hands and knees position. And this is where I felt most comfortable. And that's when they realized that the catheter for my epidural was like not attached to my body at all. So it was just like laying in the bed. So in all of that movement, it came out, and that kind of explained why I could feel everything. So I wasn't getting any medication. So in, hands and knees, and the monitors kept coming off me. They suggested using one of those like fetal scalp monitors because they were worried about baby's heart rate. And I had seen something about this online recently before birth, and like it was probably like a one-off situation, but I was absolutely terrified of what could go wrong with that. It was like a pretty gruesome scene of what I had seen, and I just did not want that to be anything to do with my situation. So when they were saying like, okay, let's get on your back and we're going to place this monitor, I just didn't listen, and I just started pushing. Like I was like, I just have to get this baby out. That is not happening. I do not want that monitor on my baby's head. Because the epidural was mostly worn off at that point, I was able to support myself, but I had two people that were kind of like worried that I was going to fall on the baby. So they were holding my forearms and kind of supporting me upright, which I really just wanted them out of my space. And it was kind of rough, but I pushed again for 20 minutes. Baby came out. When he came out, he didn't cry immediately. But they put him under my gown so I could see him before they helped me get back onto my back and place him on my chest. And it was honestly one of the proudest moments of my life. I personally have kind of the tendency to like defer to authority, especially around medical professionals, and especially in the thick of it. And this for me, like I didn't feel like what was going to happen was right, and I just kind of made a decision and went with it. And at the end, the midwife who was attending my birth, like took me aside and just said that it was beautiful and that I should be really proud of myself. And that was like really validating for me. And I just, felt really accomplished of doing that, the way that it happened. Unfortunately, when they got me back on my back, they noticed that the IV in my hand had been damaged in all of the movement around. The needle itself had shattered and bent in my hand. So the Pitocin for like after labor was not going through. And it was like pretty horrifying to look and see that in your hand. I stayed on my back skin to skin with my son while they were like fishing bits of the IV out of my hand. And honestly, any other circumstance, I probably would have like really freaked out about that. But it was very, distracted by having this beautiful baby on my chest. I'm not sure exactly how long I was there in that position, but I could tell that the staff was starting to get worried that my placenta was not coming out. When they realized a bit about the IV being broken in my hand, they had to use one of those big needles to like inject a shot in my thigh to get me some of Pitocin to try to help the placenta come out. I did hemorrhage and ended up losing quite a bit of blood it was awful, but, I had so much adrenaline that it was like easy to overlook, which is, again, bizarre, but it's birth. So, doesn't follow the normal rules. My son still was not crying very loudly. They didn't seem super worried about it, but, he was a little grunty, but he seemed fine. He was 36 weeks and 4 days. So he was technically premature, but he was 7 pounds, 9 ounces and very healthy. So again, we were skeptical of the due date. Because I lost so much blood, they had offered to do transfusion, but, I was on the cusp and I just said, let's wait and see. And I was able to get back up to like normal iron levels with some iron supplementation without the transfusion. So that was a relief. General time at the hospital was good. There was no signs of the post-dural puncture headache. And Reese was latching great, so much easier than last time. Because he was technically a premature baby, they had to put him through a bunch of extra tests, like a car seat test, where they checked to make sure the baby can support their head and breathe, which did back up the theory about the due date, because everybody who saw him was like, he's not a preemie. Like, why are we doing this test? But they had to, because it was protocol. So getting discharged was like a little delayed. We still made it out after a day, but it was like late in the day that we got sent home. Very different going home to a house that had furniture in it and toilet paper and food in the fridge. The postpartum was good. First and foremost, not being in the middle of a move, that was just tremendous. Also, my son loved to sleep. He loved to eat. We were actually able to put him down, which was like a new idea, to be able to set the baby down and have them be happy about it. I had to like actively wake him up to nurse, which was just new territory for us. With my daughter, it was like 2 years of carrying her. And, it was just a very different experience. In terms of the challenges that we navigated with the second postpartum, we were very aware of how having a brother would impact my daughter. The initial meeting was incredibly sweet, and that, my daughter kept saying like how soft baby Reese was. And she just seemed so happy to see us, but she did have a hard time accepting her brother. And I had a really hard time watching my daughter feel those feelings. And it took a while to find the flow, but, now at 11 months, it finally feels like, the family is, knock on wood, like settled in our new arrangement. And I honestly, I know this is a cliche, but I can't imagine us as a family of 3 anymore. And I'm glad to report that it does get easier.
Yes.
So, very different postpartum, but at the end of the day, just seeing our family like this and, having 2 healthy kids is just like indescribably good. So worth all of the struggle.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I feel like you kind of, it all becomes a blur too, once you get to the other side of it.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing those stories with us. Do you want to share any resources?
Yeah. So the local network for lactation support in the Berkshires, the Berkshire Nursing Families, they're, a nonprofit. They provide lactation support for free for local families. So they send someone to your house to meet with you one-on-one, and you can text them. And it was life-saving for me. I had them come for both postpartum periods. My daughter, they had multiple visits. And for my son, they came just once to make sure everything was good. And I can't say enough good things about them. They're just so wonderful. Other resources, Know Your Options is great. We already talked about that. And I think it was the best birth course that we could have taken, because you can't really plan for birth, as I have learned. And having exposure to like all the things that could happen was what we needed. And similarly, the birth hour, hearing a lot of experiences kind of helped us get over some of the fears around birth, and also just know like what are the things that we could be dealing with, and gave us an opportunity to talk about them beforehand. So that was great. Others, evidence-based birth, really, really good for specific issues and questions. Like there's a lot of, heavy lifting done on the research. So if you have specific questions in mind, I found them really helpful. The Expectful app we used for my first pregnancy to kind of help with some of the like meditations. And though I didn't get to use it in my birth, I think it was great for kind of leading up to. And then lastly, Talkspace, which is like an app that helps connect you with therapists. And for me, between the first birth and all the things we had going on in our life, having a loss and, being in an area where I didn't yet have community, and just not having a lot of local support, I was like determined that for baby number 2, I would have my supports in place before I needed them. So I found like a local doctor for me. I found a therapist. We, leaned on our network and our village a little more than I think we would have normally, kind of in advance, in anticipation that we were going to need it. And then I had thought, okay, that will make it so much easier for us if we have to ask for help, if it's already teed up. So, Talkspace was great. I ended up, meeting with therapists, and they kind of helped deal with some of the stuff that we had to deal with between the 2 babies, but ended up not really needing them for baby number 2. So the postpartum period.
All right. And then where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Yeah. So I will share my email address if anybody wants to reach out. I'm also on Instagram. I'll share my handle with you to put in the show notes page. But feel free to send me a DM.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing.
Thank you, Bryn.
All right, now I'm going to talk with Kara about the G8 test and G8 nutrition. And remember, you can use the coupon code BIRTHHOUR15 for 15% off your order at G8.com. Hi, Kara. Thank you so much for coming back on the Birth Hour to chat with me about the G8 test and G8 nutrition.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Can you remind listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
My name is Kara Everett. I'm a registered dietitian with SNP Therapeutics, and as lead dietitian for their company, I provide medical nutrition therapy and nutrigenetic counseling for clients, and I also provide education for both our clients and our healthcare practitioners on our test and our nutrition products.
All right, great. Well, let's start off by talking about the G8 test and just tell us what it is.
Absolutely. So the G8 test is a prenatal genetic screening test that evaluates 12 different genes in the 1-carbon nutrient pathways, as well as genes involved in the metabolism of 9 other vitamins and minerals. And the reason that we test for genetic variants that can influence metabolism of these nutrients is that they are all so important for your baby's brain development. So we know that during pregnancy and during the breastfeeding period, 1-carbon nutrients in particular are a group of nutrients that are really instrumental in helping with healthy brain development, as well as development of the spinal cord and the rest of the nervous system, and also the neural tube, which is the foundation of all of those parts of the body. So we found a very strong link between a person's genes and how they can metabolize those nutrients and then provide them to their baby. So by identifying variants in those genes, we can help women to individualize their nutrition plan during pregnancy to make sure they're getting enough of those nutrients based on what their genetic profile is, and also specific forms, because some genetic variants will point to the need for a specific form of one nutrient over another. So we can point women to those as well.
All right, very cool. So why is it so important for women to know if they have inefficiencies in nutrient metabolism?
That's a really good question. So we know that we have national recommendations, obviously, for nutrient intakes during pregnancy. And the problem with the national recommendations is just that they don't take into account genetic differences in nutrient metabolism. So the national recommendations basically are based on large-scale studies that have been done to see, what the levels of nutrients are that most of the population would need in order to have a healthy pregnancy. But in the case of one of the 1-carbon nutrients that I mentioned a minute ago, the name of it is choline. And in the case of that nutrient in particular, we know that production of choline goes up during pregnancy because babies need so much of it for brain development. But there is a gene called the PEMT gene, spelled PEMT, and there's a variant that we have found in that gene, and it's a pretty common variant among women of childbearing age. And if a woman has the variant in the PEMT gene, her body is not able to make choline and a neighboring compound called phosphatidylcholine in the amounts needed in pregnancy for optimal brain development. And so we found that in women with PEMT gene variants, if they don't get enough choline in pregnancy, their babies don't score as high on cognitive tests as women who got more choline in pregnancy. So really finding out about variants in these genes is a really powerful tool for them to know if they need extra supplementation in any of those nutrients.
All right, got it. So when is the best time to take the test as far as along the point in your pregnancy?
So anytime in your pregnancy would be a great time. It's not too late to take it if you're later in your pregnancy or even breastfeeding, but the best time to take it is actually 3 to 6 months before you start trying to conceive. And the reason for that is that you want to have time to build up the levels of 1-carbon nutrients and the other nutrients that we test for before you're even trying to conceive. We know that almost half of pregnancies in the U.S. are unplanned. And so many women get pregnant and don't know they're pregnant for several weeks. And the issue with that and 1-carbon nutrients is that the neural tube starts developing right away, and then it closes by week 4 to 6. So you really have to have optimal levels of those 1-carbon nutrients on day 1 of conception. So if you take the test before you even start trying, then you're going to be set up for success so that you can make sure you're getting what you need before you get pregnant.
Okay. So yeah, before pregnancy, great, but not too late if you're already pregnant.
Absolutely. Yep.
And even I feel like for postpartum, it would be great information to have as well.
Yes. We definitely have found that choline and DHA, which is an omega-3 fat, can be transferred from the mom to breast milk and then to the baby and help with brain development, like you said, after birth. So absolutely, it's really never too late to take it anywhere in your pregnancy journey. Yeah.
All right. Okay. And so then I want to talk a little bit about G8 nutrition, which is a newer aspect to what you guys are working on over there. So what makes these products different from other prenatal multivitamins?
Absolutely. So we do have a prenatal multivitamin. It's called the G8 Essential Prenatal Multivitamin. And what we did with our multivitamin is we really focused again on those 1-carbon nutrients because our founder, Dr. Steven Zeisel, has done over 30 years of research on choline in particular and other 1-carbon nutrients and their effect on health, but also specifically brain development and cognitive health in babies. So in our prenatal, we made sure to get 100% of the recommended intake for choline, which is 450 milligrams. We also include another 1-carbon nutrient that's made from choline, but it can be obtained from food and supplements. It's called betaine, and it is really important for DNA methylation, which controls gene expression in the body, which leads to a number of other health parameters in the body. So we have betaine in there as well. Pretty much any prenatal that you find is not going to have betaine. We also have a higher level of iodine than most prenatals, and iodine is another nutrient that's really important for brain development. We also included a probiotic in our prenatal, and we're the only brand that has a probiotic. We're just learning so much more about the connection between gut health and immunity, as well as brain function even, and then, promoting regularity during pregnancy and tolerance of the prenatal is so important as well. So we have the probiotic in there. We also have an additional antioxidant blend in addition to we have 20 vitamins and minerals in the product that include antioxidants, but we put the extra antioxidant blend in there as well, just to help support the immune system.
Wow, it sounds like you guys packed a lot in there.
We do, definitely, yes. And we do have a nutrition line that includes not just the multivitamin, but we also have a vegan DHA supplement. And then we have a phosphatidylcholine supplement, which I mentioned that earlier. It's a neighboring compound to choline. Phosphatidylcholine can be made from choline, and it can also make choline. And it's really important for fat metabolism and liver health in the body, as well as brain development, which we already talked about.
Great. So if someone took the G8 test and then did the genetic counseling, you could kind of steer them towards the right supplements to add maybe to that main multivitamin.
Absolutely. Yep. We can look at the results and see if there are extra supplementation in either of those areas that they need. And then, of course, as a dietitian, we also talk about food. I like to point them to food sources of all of those nutrients as well. So, yeah.
All right. So how can someone order the G8 test and get started?
They can go to our website and they can just go to g8.com and find out about the test. We also have a lot of different options for bundling the test with a counseling session. If they'd like to do that, they can bundle it with our nutrition products as well. So they can kind of look at, where they want to go when they get started, but they can just go on the site. They can order the test directly from the site. The test will be sent to their home. It's just a small kit. And they just have to provide a saliva sample and mail it back to us in the box that we provide. And our lab will process it. And then they will get a secure link to access the results. And then they will hear from me as well if they ordered a counseling session. And we will get their personalized nutrition recommendations set up from there.
Amazing. Okay, so again, that's G8.com, and Birth Hour listeners can get 15% off with the code BirthHour15. So be sure to use that if you're going to check out the G8 test. Thank you so much, Kara, for sharing today. It was so great to get more information from you on this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to Lauren for sharing her stories with us. If you want more information from today's episode, head over to thebirthhour.com and search for Lauren's name in the search bar to find her show notes page. We'll also include some links in the podcast app where you're listening to this episode.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.